Welcome back to the Modise Network. On Thursday, President Cyril Ramaphosa tabled his State of the Nation address, outlining how the government will be taking South Africa forward. But what is the state of the country and what does he have to work with? He's made other promises previously, and we did hear from the Statistician General earlier on. It's not an easy place that he's got to navigate, but he's got 5 years ahead of him, and well, at least 12 months from now until the next State of the Nation. And my guests are Lebohang, Pheko and Xhanti. Payi. Thank you very much for joining me and taking a look at the kinds of things that President Cyril Ramaphosa has got to deal with. One of the issues that stands out for me came out of the earlier interview with the Statistician General, saying that as per the NDP, the promise in that NDP is that by 2020 unemployment should have been reduced to 14%. As we speak, it is at 27%, and the expanded definition, 38%. The economy just contracted 3.2%. It's not going to be easy. It's not possible, I suppose.
It's not at all. You know, he starts, well, when he also said about what are the ways in which we actually measure these things and whether or not actually we are measuring the right things. And it is, to me, not so clear that we are actually there. Because if we think about unemployment, there's a lot of myths that are there, a lot of stories that people tell about the nature and the causes of unemployment in this country. So, for example, the president has been talking to business, and they said to business, you know, business said these young people need experience. Then the president made a plan, and they said, look, we are going to take this many young people, we're going to give them experience. Many of those young people with that experience are now not getting jobs. Gives you the idea that actually the causes of unemployment in this country are not quite what we think they are. And I think it's an important thing to realize that we've got to first zoom into what the problems are, in the sense that we know unemployment is a problem, but what causes unemployment? What's the nature of it in the real sense? Last day we had the Job Summit, which I think by all accounts, many people who were there will say this thing did not hit the spot. And even if we then, when we define the nature of unemployment, the cause of unemployment, we still have to find solutions. Those should be the right kinds of solutions. But that's not even the place where we have to stop. Because as we know, we have always tried to find solutions, but there's something that will always disrupt us. So if we think, for example, you know, even if we talk about employing 100 kids, and then we say that will be what they call sustainable. Over a period of time, a lot of things happen. You know, the China-US relations might disrupt import and exports. So what is our plan, for example, for some of the things that may disrupt the plans we make? Because it's not enough to say we're going to put, and I think that's the problem we face now with the NDP. Because we say, well, we diagnose this thing. Now let's assume the diagnosis was right. Now that we are actually implementing, we're having lots of things that are happening because, of course, the economy is quite dynamic both here at home and internationally.
But I want to hear from you that, I mean, we've identified the whole number of what is wrong with the planning, right? Firstly, does the NDP still apply? Because it seems to be something that's trotted out now and again, but, you know, it's a good story to have, that you can talk about whenever you want. But what does it mean, really, the dynamics that you've just spoken about?
But I mean, the NDP is really, it's aspirational. But I think we should begin there. And the notion that you're going to correct structural unemployment, structural inequality, structural dispossession, solve the land question, solve intergenerational poverty and inequality within a roughly a 15-20 year time span, which is what the NDP has given itself, is really a fallacy, particularly because we don't even talk about the nature. You know, Xhanti talks about the nature of unemployment, but what is the nature of employment? In a country, in the context of a country which is on a continent where the majority of people are in what we prefer to call the parallel economy, sometimes called the informal economy, where up to 80% of people do not wake up in a 9-to-5 traditional way. And it seems as though South Africa is actually falling straight into that trap and is absolutely all about the hustle. So there's a hustle economy that is very vibrant in this country, which is not accounted for. So there are people who are occupied, even though they are not registered as being employed, and they may not be paying you know, VAT in the way that that constitutes a real business. But it's all about the hustle. So if we're not even talking about the nature of unemployment sufficiently, much less the nature of employment, how then do we begin to diagnose the other sets of pillars? And then you add to that an education system which is absolutely in appalling condition. Again, completely discordant to our aspirations. So we want to have X amount of graduates and PhDs by 2013. I mean, we've got these massive numbers that we should be producing.
But here's the thing, interesting. I mean, besides the National Development Plan, right, and also the issues that you raised earlier on, Xhanti, the ANC itself, as the government, seems to be having a different view as an organization that is not in government per se, of how the economy must be managed. One moment you hear about quantitative easing, the next moment you hear about the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, and what is the coherent thinking that you see emerging out of all these confusing voices?
There's no coherence, because actually it speaks to exactly what we're talking about. Because first we have to diagnose the problem. What is the question, for example, we're trying to answer when we talk about nationalizing the Reserve Bank or quantitative easing? What is the problem, the underlying problem that we're trying to figure the answer to? If we answer that question first, I think it might take us further into actually a more comfortable ground. So now we are actually having ideological discussions, which are not bad in themselves. But the problem is that actually we have to say this is where we are going, and we have seen that if we do this and this and this, it will actually work out that way. I mean, the former Statistical General used to say that actually in statecraft there's no science. And this is critical, and this is quite important, because we have to find some scientific measures. We have to walk amongst the people, get the right kinds of questions, go there and find out what people need, what are the issues, and then be able to formulate solutions. It is not helpful at all to sit around, even with analysts in a room, and ask them to give you their opinions, because that's not the useful thing. So when we are hearing stories that we are not funding a very basic service in our society that helps us to determine the nature, the causes of our problems, and how we, and then therefore, so that actually our policymakers have accurate information about the problems that we face, even when we think about unemployment, right? If we are hearing, there's underfunding there, are we thinking correctly about the number of unemployed people?
An argument can be made that we talk a lot in South Africa, right? We want a lot of information, and we consult the president. Is inclined that way, for instance, and we've got the commissions, we've got the consultations. Is the information that you say should be informing the discussion coming through, though? I mean, what is the president working with?
So this is the thing. I mean, you have your statistics, and then you have a tax base, you have a whole machinery of information gathering. And you're quite right. We're not short. We're very clever in South Africa. We always have ideas about one thing or another. There's a complete disconnection between the information that is being derived from the statistics in general and the way in which it perhaps informs advocacy and policy making in a meaningful way. So that should be really giving the data in a way that proves a scientific case that X amount of people in this town are employed in this sector, their income is this amount, they have access to these sorts of health and education facilities. You would imagine that makes it a really linear process then to budget allocation, for example, and to prioritizing geographic nodes and sector nodes, because based on the information that we're getting, nothing. It just seems as though information is being derived for the sake of it.
On the back of what you're saying, actually, it takes me back to the point the statistician general made, saying that more households in the Eastern Cape depend on social grants, for instance. But it does not seem to be a policy position that the burden of stimulating the economy in the Eastern Cape should be placed with the government there and the policymakers or whoever is in charge there. There's no idea of what do you do then to deal with it.
If I may, because Eastern Cape is my home province as well. The problem there as well is also that we are not really decentralizing the idea of development. It's very urban centric. And despite what we say about rural development, infrastructure, bringing the country together, closing the digital divide to ensure that even people in rural areas are able to communicate effectively, this is really lip service. And we want to fetishize and romanticize rural poverty and talk about this mythical Makumalo. Leave Makumalo alone, please. Let us just deal with the nuts nuts and bolts of the fact that there are roads. When I go to my hometown, my home village, even now in the Eastern Cape now, it might as well be the same as when my father, my parents were growing up, even my grandparents were growing up. We don't even need statistics. We can see the situation for ourselves. Dusty, those proverbial dusty roads, dusty indeed. And the fact that you cannot get a network, a signal on your phone. You have to go and stand on a mountain and stand on your head in order to make a phone call. What does that tell you? And what does that tell you then about the access then to the digital platforms, your ability to source information quickly, the ability for people in business there to access market data quickly on their phones, using reliable Wi-Fi. Basic things like that. That's not rocket science. A little girl can tell you, a little child who's running around can tell you that we are poor, we are dispossessed, we are far behind our counterparts who live in urban areas.
But give the president the benefit of the doubt, right? He said he's reconfiguring the departments in order to sharpen the delivery.
And he must ask them something further. I mean, on the question of education, for example, I know you have been talking about this for many years. What is the thing that we are trying to get out of our education system? Because you can't just say we are going to improve education outcomes.
Yes.
To what end are we improving them? So if we say we want 100 matriculants, we want 50 PhDs, what are these people who are studying PhDs studying them towards? What are we going to use them to do? We are not making very basic choices. So, successful countries will say, over the next 20 years, we would like to create an agrarian economy. And then if that's what we want to do, and we've looked at the world and we thought this is the way we should be going, then we say our education system is going to train predominantly for this. Now, of course, we are in a free society, so people should be allowed to study the arts, should be allowed to study medicine, whatever it is that they desire. But for the vast majority of our social planning, we should be able to say now, but we know that our economy is well built. Our people will be best served if we focus here. And then we drive an education system like that. We can't have a generalist education system that clearly is not going to give us the outcomes we want, because we have already seen that. So our big problem is exactly that.
Is it deliberate, or is it because we don't know, or what is it? I mean,
it's just cognitive dissonance between our aspirations and getting there. And I mean, Xhanti, what you're saying about it's a free society, which people should do what they should. Should you do what you want when you're going to go and be unemployed for 5-10 years? Should you really? And especially when we know that there's already a database which talks about the skills which are scarce, or the skills which are the most desirable. How many more HR managers do we need to be sitting under a tree somewhere? How many? There's an overproduction of some skills which are not per se the ones which are the most suited for this particular economy. Should we? And it's amazing that we talk about STEM, and yet our maths. We're talking about the fourth industrial revolution and digitization. Our maths results in relation to the GDP of our country and in relation to our peers is by far the worst. I mean, there was a WEF survey which was conducted a couple of years ago. Out of 138 countries or so, South Africa was polled at 136.
Well, I mean, the Department of Education will dispute that. They argue
they can,
vociferously when you raise that point. But we will continue with our discussion in a moment, and we invite you to engage with the show using the hashtag the Modise Network on social media as we continue to look at the state of play in the nation and the situation that President Cyril Ramaphosa is trying to improve.